It was 6:47 a.m. when an American early warning radar detected an ascending flash off the northern coast of Venezuela. In mere seconds, an S-125 Pechora 2M model surface-to-air missile had been launched from the vicinity of Puerto La Cruz, aimed directly at an F-16C fighter jet patrolling over the central Caribbean. The trajectory was clean, the initial thrust perfect, but the projectile did not reach its target. In a matter of 42 seconds, the pilot activated thermal dispersion countermeasures and executed a descending spiral evasive maneuver that took the jet out of the impact radius. The missile fell into the sea, about 18 kilometers northeast of the Venezuelan coast. Thus began the incident that has shaken the military balance of the Caribbean and reignited tensions dormant for more than a decade. The event occurred in the early hours of October 21st, 2025, in an officially unrecognized but estimated air point 65 nautical miles, or 120 kilometers north of the Venezuelan coastline. A US F-16C fighter, belonging to the 79th Expeditionary Fighter Squadron of the US Air Force, was conducting a routine maritime surveillance patrol when infrared sensors detected a missile launch from the Venezuelan anti-aircraft system. The response was immediate: evasive maneuver, chaff, flares, and transmission of a tactical alert to Hato Air Base in Curaçao at 6:48:21 a.m. According to regional intelligence sources, the attack lasted barely 58 seconds from launch to failed impact. The first US-sent reconnaissance drones arrived 9 minutes later, while the American plane had already regained altitude and was on a return course to Curaçao, where it landed at 7:16 a.m. without damage. The missile used, according to preliminary analysis of fragments recovered in the sea by a Dutch NATO ship, was identified as a Pechora 2EM, a modernized Soviet model with optical guidance and passive radar, capable of reaching targets up to 35 kilometers away and 18,000 meters in altitude. Venezuela possesses about 12 active batteries of this system, distributed along the northern coastal strip under the control of the Comprehensive Aerospace Defense Command, CODAI. The chronology of events reveals unusual coordination. At 6:45 a.m., Venezuelan radars at the Barcelona base detected what they called an unidentified hostile eco approaching the limit of their Air Defense Identification Zone, ADIZ. Just 2 minutes later, the launch order was authorized by an officer of the 42nd Defense Group in a procedure that, according to anonymous spokespersons, responded to an immediate reaction protocol against intrusion. Washington, for its part, maintains that the F-16 had not entered Venezuelan airspace and that its route was registered in the International Central Caribbean Corridor, 112 kilometers from any sovereign point. Caracas, on the other hand, assures that the plane violated its extended surveillance zone, a term not recognized by any international treaty. At 6:49 a.m., barely a minute after the Venezuelan S-125 missile crashed into the sea, the secondary radar of the Carinero Aerospace Control Center in Miranda State registered a multiple, low-altitude echo moving in a northwest direction. Operators described the phenomenon as an oscillating electromagnetic signature, similar to that produced by swarms of short-range reconnaissance drones. According to the military log, the echo persisted for 2 minutes and 36 seconds, suddenly disappearing without leaving traces in the radio spectrum. The temporal coincidence triggered all alarms. The Venezuelan Ministry of Defense activated Code Shield 7, an intermediate-level alert that mandates the immediate dispersal of mobile anti-aircraft batteries to secondary positions. In less than 12 minutes, 3 Pechora units and 1 Tor M1 had relocated to coastal areas near Boca de Uchire under a protocol of concealment and preventive reloading. The Caribbean sky filled with radar emissions, interference, and cross-tracking. Meanwhile, at the Combined Air Operations Center, CAOC in Curaçao, U.S. analysts were reviewing thermal records of the incident in real time. The F-16's infrared images clearly showed the launch from the ground, but also captured a second flash, weaker and of unknown nature, about 27 seconds after the first. Washington suspects it might be a second Venezuelan battery activating its guidance radar to acquire a new target, but without firing. Caracas, conversely, claimed that this flash corresponded to the engine ignition of a US MQ-9 Reaper drone that had allegedly entered its airspace from the west. In the hallways of the Pentagon, the narrative was different. An internal report, leaked 18 hours after the event, mentioned the hypothesis of a planned thermal deception, a tactic in which several false targets are digitally simulated to saturate enemy radars. In theory, the echoes detected by Venezuela would not have been drones, but signals generated by a jamming pod launched from the F-16 when it began its defensive maneuver. The U.S. pilot, identified as Lieutenant Mark Ellison, stated in a post-mission report that he felt an anomalous vibration after the missile launch, possibly caused by the turbulence of an electronic countermeasure. The radar warning receiver went crazy, he wrote. It seemed like there was more than one source of tracking. For his part, General Hector Ruiz, head of CODAI, assured that Venezuelan radars were not mistaken. What we detected was not a technical failure. There were several objects in coordinated movement. They were not birds or interference. Something or someone was there. At 7:03 a.m., communication interferences were reported on the VHF frequencies of the Maiquetía and Barcelona air traffic controllers. It is suspected that they came from electronic warfare equipment aboard the F-16 itself or from a KC-135 tanker orbiting 90 kilometers from the incident. The echoes disappeared as quickly as they emerged, but they left behind a dilemma that no one has resolved. Was there really a second launch, or was it a digital mirage? While military agencies exchanged versions, a new movement on the ground began to take shape. At 7:22 a.m., the 42nd Defense Battalion, stationed on the periphery of Puerto Piritu, informed the Central Air Defense Command of the detection of irregular thermal activity over the eastern coast. The FLIR, forward-looking infrared. Sensors of a mobile TOR M1 unit captured 3 heat points moving slowly at ground level, heading northeast. At first glance, they looked like civilian vehicles, but their thermal signature was too stable and their speeds identical. Exactly 28 kilometers per hour, a figure that betrayed coordinated mechanized movement. At 7:27 a.m., the tactical radar Vostok E of the same battalion confirmed that the echoes came from a lightweight U.S. convoy, presumably composed of unmanned amphibious reconnaissance vehicles, MULER, deployed from a support ship 9 nautical miles from the coast. Caracas immediately denounced an indirect ground incursion, although Washington called the event a maritime tracking exercise in international waters. President Nicolas Maduro was informed at 7:31 a.m., at which point he ordered the repositioning of 2 Buk M2E batteries to the east of Anzoátegui and the activation of a red level air alert over the entire coastal strip from Caracas to Cumaná. Simultaneously, the takeoff of 2 Sukhoi Su-30 Mk2s was ordered from the Teniente Luis del Valle Garcia Air Base in Barcelona. The fighters took off at 7:36 a.m., reaching a patrol altitude of 4,200 meters just 4 minutes later. Meanwhile, in the Caribbean Sea, a US E-3 Sentry AWACS aircraft began emitting broad-spectrum radar pulses from a position 230 kilometers off the coast, controlling the airspace and coordinating the transmissions of the F-16 stationed in Curaçao. The AWACS immediately detected the 2 Venezuelan Sukhois, calculating their interception course at Mach 0.9. The tension grew minute by minute. From a tactical standpoint, both sides were operating under the strictest rules of engagement. Do not fire unless the other opens fire or invades confirmed sovereign space. However, the limit of that sovereignty became blurred in a sky without visible borders. What began as an isolated missile launch had escalated in just 45 minutes into a high-stakes game of positioning, where every radar, every signal, and every aircraft movement could be interpreted as provocation. Venezuelan electronic warfare stations deployed on the coast emitted pulses to confuse enemy radars, while US Lacrosse 8 and USA 310 satellites adjusted their orbit to observe the area in real time. Venezuelan Defense Minister Vladimir Padrino Lopez appeared before cameras at 8:05 a.m., assuring that the attack against our territory will not go unanswered, despite no direct aggression having been confirmed. Minutes later, the White House convened an urgent meeting of the National Security Council, NSC, where they assessed whether the initial missile launch could be considered an intentional hostile act. At that moment, the Caribbean was on the verge of a direct confrontation. Two Venezuelan fighters were flying just 15 kilometers from the airspace controlled by the US AWACS. Any erroneous reading, any misinterpreted interference could trigger chaos. At 8:14 a.m., the radar of the E-3 Sentry early warning aircraft registered a new signal, an aerial object without a transponder coming from the east, at an altitude of 6,800 meters and a speed close to Mach 1.2. Its thermal signature partially matched that of a Sukhoi Su-24 a model of which Venezuela has only 2 operational units. However, the flight parameters did not correspond to a standard manned aircraft. The ascent was irregular, and there was no radio communication. For the next 83 seconds, the contact advanced in a straight line towards the area where the 2 Venezuelan Su-30s were located, and according to AWACS records, passed only 3.5 kilometers from one of them before vanishing from the radar. No impact, no visible flash, no physical trace. The echo disappeared as if it had never existed. Subsequent reports indicated that the supposed third aircraft could have actually been an experimental supersonic reconnaissance drone, possibly a US RQ-180, operating without official confirmation. However, South American intelligence sources support the opposite theory, that it was a Venezuelan ANSU-5 type unmanned vehicle, developed confidentially for tactical response operations. At 8:17 a.m., the Venezuelan Sukhois received the order to return to base. Simultaneously, the Pentagon declared a limited DEFCON 3 alert for the U.S. Southern Command Air Forces, a level reserved for situations of potential hostile contact. On the ground, Venezuelan units remained in combat position until 9:42 a.m., at which point the national radar system confirmed that there were no further threats underway. The total exchange, from the initial missile launch to the withdrawal of patrols, lasted 2 hours and 55 minutes. No aircraft was damaged, but the diplomatic impact was immediate. In retrospect, the October 21, 2025 incident marked a turning point. The U.S. intensified its surveillance missions over the Caribbean, while Venezuela reinforced its coastal defenses with new short-range anti-aircraft batteries. Neither side admitted mistakes, but both understood the fragility of the aerial balance in the region. To this day, the joint investigation into the third contact remains classified. Satellites did not record debris, radars lack coherence, and thermal recordings were sealed. The only certainty is that, for 3 hours, the Caribbean sky became a gray zone where technology, fear, and politics dangerously brushed against each other.